Alright, so I want to run you through a couple of quick scenarios on a car that won't start. Say you hop into your car in the morning, it doesn't fire up. You've obviously got a problem. So let's just look at a couple of reasons why that might be happening. If your car doesn't start, the first thing you need to ID is the engine turning over. All cars sound a little different, but you know what it sounds like when you normally start your car. You hit the key and it goes chug 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 boom. If it's not doing anything and it's just dead, we've already done kind of what to do if you have a dead battery. We talked about how to jump start your car. We talked certainly about how to push start it and everything else. So that's what you need to get working on. Your battery's totally flat. If you hop in, say your lights on your dashboard are nice and bright though, and you know your wipers work, try your wipers. If your wipers are working full blast, you've got battery juice, and it's still not cranking over, you've got a problem, and the problem is your starter motor is seized. Or it's just about to be seized and it's worn out and it's in a bad position. So you've probably heard people say, get out and bang on the starter, and that's exactly what you need to do. You need to find a stick or a wooden handled screwdriver or something plastic, whatever you want, whatever you can find really, and just give that starter motor a few taps right there, and that might be enough to free up maybe some carbon that's built up in there, or maybe just something's a little bit stuck, it's in a bad position and the gears aren't engaging with the flywheel. So that might be an easy way out of it. The other idea would be to put it into fifth gear so that when you push the car, the motor turns over, and just do that for a foot or something to reset everything into a new position and then try it again. So that's basically all you need to worry about. If you hit your key and there's no engine turning over noise, nothing's going on, but you seem to have battery power, it is your starter engine. Or one of these connections down here possibly, or some other silly thing with a security system in your car, or you unlock the door from the inside and it won't let you start it. There's a lot of different reasons that can happen, but worry about that in your own vehicles with your own kind of security systems and everything else. So say now you're at the point where your battery's good, you've got power. If your starter engine's good, it should be turning over. Trum, 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 trum. It just won't fire. What you need to make any car run really is air, fuel, compression, and spark. So if any one of those things isn't there, you've got a problem. Fuel is usually a pretty easy one to check. Do you have gas in your car? If you don't have fuel, obviously the car's never going to start. So I've seen a lot of people go through a lot of different troubleshooting things. Maybe your gauge is wrong. Maybe you are out of gas. So certainly check that and see what's going on. You want to listen to your fuel pump. When you turn the key on to accessory, your fuel pump, shut your stereo off, everything else, your fuel pump should make a nice consistent buzz or hum. And it should just sound like for a second. If you turn your key on to accessory and your fuel pump sounds like a weird garbled mess coming out of your trunk where it's going or something like that, you're out of gas. The pump is cavitating. Or maybe the vent is plugged and it's not getting fed. Or there's a couple of reasons, but the problem is at your fuel tank for some reason, whether it's the pump or something related to that's gone wrong, that is just not pushing fuel to your motor. The only other way to check for fuel, there's a couple of easy ways. If you have a few tools, you want to look at where your fuel goes into your motor. In a normal car like this, it's pretty easy to tell. This is your fuel rail right here. Between your valve cover and your intake manifold, there's a fuel rail that has a connector on that side that goes down, and it's got 4 injectors, because it's a 4-cylinder motor, that go down into the cylinders and feed each one gas. So if you had a moment and a few tools, you could pop this boot off, you could see where the hose goes there, pop that hose off and stick it into a clear jug of some kind. Any clear jug that you have might work, a 1 gallon, a washer fluid jug or something like that, and turn the key on. what you want to see is pressure and volume. So you want to see when that hose is in a clear jug, you want to see a good amount of fuel coming out at a pretty high pressure. If you've only got one or the other, you've got an issue. So if you've got a lot of pressure but it's not filling the jug up fast, you've got a problem. Or if it's filling the jug up pretty quickly but it's not really under high pressure, you've got a problem. So either one of those, it's a plugged fuel filter, it's a going bad fuel pump, it's something else related to the fuel system in the back half of the car that you're gonna have to deal with, get under the vehicle and see what's going on. Chances are it's bad gas or a plugged fuel filter or a fuel pump going bad or something like that. So it's pretty easy to check. Most of the time it's not fuel related, or if it is, it's just because you're out of gas. But check those few easy things and see. If everything there appears to be good, move on. So your battery's good, your starter turns the motor over, you've got fuel. Well, what else do you need? You need air, you need spark, you need compression. So where does the air come from? That's usually a very simple one, and it's hardly ever really the problem, but the air goes into your engine somewhere that's going to look like this. So this is your air box. This is a little metering sensor that tells how much air is going in, and the air goes through this tube, obviously. This is your throttle cable back to the inside, intake manifold. That's how air gets into your motor. So you can certainly, there's usually some way, without even having any tools, you can pop a few clips off to open this up and look at your air filter. In this case, doesn't look great, but it doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's obviously been driven in dusty conditions and everything else, but it's really not that much of an issue. That should be fine. And again, there's no, a squirrel's nest or something like that in there. If you've sucked up a lot of mud or other debris, or if it's really plugged full of sand, that's definitely an issue that you need to just get this stuff all cleaned out and put it back together. So other than really dusty conditions or driving through, a whole bunch of leaves maybe can get in there, use your imagination. But if you open this up and it's all plugged with crap, certainly clean it all out, put it back together. Chances are it isn't. Chances are it looks something similar to that or better. Put it back together, and that takes that right out of the equation. If you're curious, these hoses right here, in an older car, these hoses can crack. If an older car gets cracked or dry rotted, it might be in that little groove, and you might not see it unless you squish it or pop it off, apparently. And certainly look underneath it. Check this hose for cracks or leaks or anything like that, or certainly just having that clamp loose like it was right there could be a bit of a problem. So loosen that clamp up, get it back on, tighten all of these clamps, this clamp right here back up, and that's a pretty easy system to diagnose. Make sure this is clamped on together nicely, obviously, but chances are everything there is good, and you're probably pretty happy and good to go. So air, typically not an issue. So if your fuel is good, your battery's good, your starter's good, your air is good, what else have you got here? Well, spark and compression. Spark can be a little bit of a pain, and modern cars are different from older cars, and even older cars than this are different. So there's a few ways of checking whether or not you've got spark here, and you just want to be careful when you do it. There's safe ways to do it, and you could certainly, the only way you're going to get hurt here, your ignition system runs from the key, obviously, sends a signal to this ignition coil right here, which multiplies at very high amperage, goes through this wire right here to your distributor cap. There's a rotor inside your distributor cap that spins around, sends them to each one of your spark plugs through the spark plug wires. So this line right here that comes from the coil to the distributor is very high voltage. You don't usually want to or need to test it, so typically stay away from this one just because you could get burned and you don't want to play around with it too much. But certainly if you're feeling frisky later on down the road, we can get into that. What you want to look at here is, do you have spark to one of the spark plugs? Well, if you have a spare spark plug, it's as easy as putting a spark plug in here, resting it somewhere, and then turning the key and seeing if there's a small spark jumping the gap in the spark plug. That's fine. I don't have a spare spark plug with me, so I can do it with a screwdriver. Do you mind just making sure it's in neutral and the key's on? So I'm just having him put it in neutral here so that I don't run myself over when I do this. The key's on, so everything else should be pretty happy. What I'm going to do is stick the screwdriver in here, and then I want to make a narrow gap between the shaft of this screwdriver and something. Somewhere that spark can jump across to a ground. So kind of use your imagination here. That looks pretty all right like there. So this spark should jump the gap. Let me find somewhere that might be better for the camera. This spark should jump the gap from my screwdriver shaft to a piece of exposed metal. I'm not going to talk, I'll just do it. So what we're looking for here is to just see a spark jump the gap between this screwdriver and this little piece of steel right here. Alright, we had spark there from one of our spark plug wires, so we can be pretty sure that now, you know, if one of them is working, chances are all four of them is working. Chances are that your distributor's working and that your ignition coil is working. If you try one of these though, and you don't have any spark jumping like that, you've got another problem. And what it might be your distributor, it might be your coil right here. So what I'm going to do is just basically show you how a distributor works. A lot of cars, especially older cars, they're very easy to remove. It's usually just a little snap clip like that or something, and then you can pull your distributor cap right off. So what's going on here, wow, that one is destroyed. There's no reason that this car should be running. If you can see how burnt that is right there, that's pretty apocalyptic. So I'm amazed it even starts at all. Shocking. But what's going on here is this is gear driven by the engine. So this is going to spin around in here, and the coil is sending power to the center, right, to this pin right here. And then as this turns, it bridges the gap between one cylinder and another cylinder and another cylinder and another one. So that's what's making your car actually run, is each of these spark plugs getting sent the voltage at exactly the right time, determined by this thing spinning around. So if there's moisture in here, you've got a big problem. You can tell that this one, you can see it's got a crack in it, so you'll have condensation in here. Maybe you drove through a river or something. If you've got a lot of water in here, instead of the spark jumping nicely from here to there, then here to there, then here to there, you know, you can imagine it would look just like a lightning storm in here. Things would be happening all over the place if you've got water in here conducting power around where it shouldn't be going. So that's a big problem. Dry it out the best you can. Dry both of these areas out as best as possible. WD-40 actually works really well for this. WD stands for water displacement, which is exactly what it does, and it does it very well. So WD-40 certainly works. Get a rag, clean it all out, put it back together. Try it again. This cap really shouldn't be working the way that it is. You can see that this thing is really cooked and really destroyed. Somehow this car still runs, which, okay, you know, we'll take it if it's working. I'll just put it right back and pretend I never saw it. But certainly something that if this was my car, I'd want to replace that pretty soon. And certainly this cap does have a crack on the inside of it, which happens over time. No big deal, but certainly you'd want to replace both of those items pretty quickly if you actually wanted to drive this car for any length of time. So that can solve a lot of your troubles right there, is just by cleaning the moisture out and seeing if there's a problem in here. If I actually couldn't get this car to start and I saw that distributor rotor in there looking the way it does, I would probably assume that was it. I'm amazed this thing actually runs with that as is, but certainly it does. So if everything there seems to be working, it all looks in place, then the next culprit might be this ignition coil. There's different ways of troubleshooting stuff. For some reason, there's something in the ignition system. These don't go bad horribly often, but they certainly do after, you know, 100 and something, 200,000 miles. But they're almost good for the life of the vehicle. So you can check for spark coming out of here, but you want to be extremely careful. You do it in the same way that I just did with the spark plug wire, but there's going to be a very large amount of voltage coming out of here. So make sure if you do that, certainly do it somewhere that you'll be able to see, and keep your hands well clear of it. So you could almost just set this somewhere that you can see the spark jump. You don't need to plug a screwdriver into it or anything. You just want to see that spark jumping, you know, from that ignition coil across to a piece of metal. And you don't have to worry about the vibration. There's no way the engine's going to start or something's going to go weird because it's not plugged into the distributor. You just want to set it somewhere carefully that it'll stay, you know, a few centimeters away from any piece of you know, metal that'll ground out. Should work. That would have been a really nice one, but it doesn't really like it there. Maybe I'll try here. Yeah, and then can you turn the key on, please? So again, with the key on, there's a pretty significant gap right there, but again, it's a decent amount of voltage, so it should be able to jump right across there. So I'll hit the key again. Oh, it sparked at the end. So I'll just do it one more time. And you see, right from there, that means that your coil is good. So if that wasn't happening, you know, and again, be careful with it. Don't hold on to the thing, especially if it's wet or your hands are wet or whatever. But set it somewhere nicely. Again, you know, maybe even a slightly smaller gap than what I had. If you could rest it, you know, a few millimeters away from pretty much any bolt head or piece of steel or an engine mount or something around here, you know, far away from, not against the fuel rail obviously or something silly, but you know, use common sense. But you should be able to test your coil like that as well. So now we're in the same boat. If our car didn't start, we know that the battery is good, the starter motor's good, we've got fuel because we checked that all out, we know our air is coming in, and now we know we've got spark, you know, going all the way through coil, distributor, spark plug wires, spark plugs, assuming spark is happening in there. What else can cause your car not to start? And a plugged exhaust system, and it would have to be very plugged in order for the car not to start. I think we've all seen Beverly Hills Cop with the bananas in the tailpipes and whatever. That might not work, but if for some reason you backed right into a snowbank when you parked the thing, or maybe you really, when you drove it, you bottomed out hard and really folded an exhaust pipe up, or you backed into a grassy hill and, you know, completely plugged the tailpipe or something like that, the car might not want to start. So certainly it's pretty easy to check, you know, go back, look at the tailpipe, maybe take a look underneath at your exhaust and just make sure that it's not completely damaged or completely plugged. But that should be pretty much anything that's going to cause your car not to start. If you're at this point and your car is still not starting, what you're looking for, okay, compression. Does the engine have compression? And that would be a timing belt issue. And certainly the timing of the engine, like I said, the spark needs to be happening at a certain time, the pistons need to be going up and down at a certain time, and the valves need to be opening and closing at a certain time. If things are way out of whack, it ain't gonna happen. But you know, most cases your car ran the day before and now your engine's not working. So one thing you'll see, you can hear this car when it turns over, it chugs over and chugs over and chugs over pretty nicely. I can take this off and just let you listen to the sound that the engine makes when it's turning over. And that's about right. You can tell you've got a lot of electricity, the battery's strong, it's turning over quickly, that sounds pretty normal. You should be pretty happy with that. If it ever sounds like it's just freewheeling, you should hear this chug, 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 chug noise. If it ever just goes really quickly, what happens sometimes, you can break a timing belt, or a timing belt can slip from where it is, and you'd notice because you'd be driving along probably aggressively and the car all of a sudden stops working. That can be a sign of a timing belt that's let go, or slipped a lot. Most of the time they just dry rot, they crack inside of here and they'll break, and then that'll leave you stranded on the side of the road, calling a tow truck. It moved for a second. That shouldn't shock me.